sincerely hope that Abhishek is coming, because it's him that is the expert. Oh, he's coming.
Yeah,
He's coming.
Hello. Yeah. So, hi Abhishek. Maybe Frederick, do you think is required, or we can start Frederick and Mohammed?
Already declined this invite.
Okay, Mohammed has declined, and Frederick.
I guess this is not a meeting where we will take major decisions about the V8 project, right?
I think we need to decide on the project scope and finalize whatever we have discussed. So it's just
the
recap.
Okay, but if there is something we need to bring back home on our side, I need to do that. But hopefully we won't bump into that big things here.
Okay, so may I request maybe if Abhishek or Per, you can take lead and start some discussion. Maybe just a recap what we discussed earlier and about the project.
Okay, when you talk about what we discussed earlier, is it the upgrade per se, or
upgrade per se, and the decisions
we had. Yeah. So, guys, let's get that PowerPoint on the screen. If nobody is doing that, then let me send something through. And because I'm working on 2 PCs,
I can do that.
If you can share that, the last one which I shared.
It was a PowerPoint in the invite also.
Yes.
Maybe Kishor, you should take and open that from our end.
Yeah. And then let's call it, because that PowerPoint contains the framework, let's call it. And then, of course, not everything we had already this year, only 10 meetings to move to the finalization of this PowerPoint. So I can explain a little bit.
Yeah. But I think the crucial part is around the portal and things like that. So we can decide on the solution, because if we can decide on the solution, then it's possible for me to place purchase order and an SSR. So for me, it is, I don't know really what the purpose was with this session, but I thought it was to come to some kind of an agreement here.
To get everybody on the same page.
Yeah. So we need to feel. So therefore, I have stuffed up with Darsan and so on here. Huh? Good.
Yeah. So let me do now.
I put
10 minutes.
myself on mute now, so you know that.
I will start talking 10 minutes now, and then we can take it from there. So a very short history. Step one. So already in 2017, it was notified that the IDM was going out of support. In 2019, we added it to the scope of the sub-landscape upgrade. It was removed there, and it was decided to run a so-called POC1, POC2 IDM. Hans Björk from SKF was there, the counterpart PM. This IDM POC1, POC2 was set up. It was first validated in the IDM 7.2 version. Then it was upgraded to IDM 8.0. Then all kinds of things were patched, etc., etc. Okay, that's a relative long exercise. Let's call it, we got more or less the environment which we were expecting. And that ended up with, let's call it, decommissioning of this POC1, POC2 environment. In the context of the sub-landscape upgrade scope definition for 2021, we added IDM again, because in the meantime, the real status of the IDM is that every component we are using in the IDM end-to-end flow is currently out of support. Everything. Yeah, and that's something we need to realize. Now, in February or January, there was some issue which caused IDM downtime. Then there was some escalation happening, and etc., etc. And then I shared out all the history information again, and I said, okay, guys, step one, let's get everybody on the same page. Everything is out of support here. Secondly, let's call it, we have done this POC 1, POC 2 exercise, and we know in the meantime that this pure upgrade thing is a really, how you call it, labor-intensive exercise. I highlighted again that there were fundamentally two options. One option is, let's call it upgrade option. The second option is blank install. It was more or less decided, let's call it that we nor DXC nor SKF could take this decision on their own. So we triggered CP to provide us support and guidance related to this installation. I will not go into the 10 meetings we had with this SCP expert, but the end result of this exercise was that the IDM blank install, so a full parallel installation with a relative short switch from old application to new application, would be the best approach. So therefore, in this PowerPoint, you see 2021 IDM blank install. Yeah, so that's of course the first thing to be confirmed, let's call it, because otherwise we are back on the status in February this year, where we have to reopen the discussion about upgrade against blank install. The fundamental input from SCP here was the fact that the effort for an upgrade would be approximate, almost the same as the effort you have to do in a blank install, with some pitfalls, some remarks, etc., etc. Also, Per, but counter-speak me if I put it wrong, but also from CAP side, there was a statement, okay, if we go for a blank install, at least we are not focused with pending items which are currently in the IDM 7.2, which should not be migrated anyway to an IDM 8.0 because the functionality has changed, and etc., etc. So this scenario which is presented here is IDM blank install, parallel installation. Fundamentally, we do not touch the existing running IDM. We build a new infrastructure side by side. We install a blank IDM 8.0. And then step by step, let's call it, we do all the integration work and using all kinds of different techniques, from copy over configurations, over transports, over database refreshes. We're doing a full validation on the blank install. Once we are comfortable about that one, and in parallel, we create also a blank development environment, and then we use the IDM 8.0 sandbox configuration to duplicate it into the development landscape, And then, let's call it, we have a sandbox and a development environment. Again, just remember, everything I say here does not touch the running IDM. Okay? So once we are comfortable about this sandbox and development statement, we move ahead, let's call it, with the setup of the test and the production environment. And fundamentally, we made the statement, nothing will go directly from development to test. On the test environment, we will redo the exercise from the blank install to the full configured landscape or setup. Of course, we will take the learnings from the sandbox development setup there. And once we have validated everything on test, let's call it, we move the same way we moved sandbox to development, we will move also test to production. And again, always remember whatever I state here, IDM, the running IDM is not touched in any way or form. So for the end users, till now, Nothing has happened. This is pure technically preparation work, internal work. Then let's call it once this configuration and all the settings and all the data, etc., between test and production is done. Let's call it then we make a final statement. Let's call it related to how we get the data from the old IDM into the new IDM. And once that one is done, let's call it, then we do a kind of what we call 48 hours downtime statement, which will be the time we need, let's call it, to switch from the old IDM to the new IDM, which will be mainly, let's call it, a repointing of the so-called virtual access path from the old IDM to the new IDM. That's the framework. Long time, long story. And of course, just to be on the explicit side, we have the IDM on the Windows boxes, and we're talking about the portal side on the Linux side, which contains an IDM interface to the IDM. So the HTTP link the people are using, idm-skf.net or something like that, that one goes over the portal to the backend Windows IDM. And it's that link that will be changed as part of the, let's call it, cutover.
Thank you for this presentation. Now I have heard it a few times, so I start to get it.
Yeah, okay, that's the goal.
Yeah, so sorry for the rest of the people here that knows everything.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So I put here on this page also decided, but okay, Darsan wanted to kind of, okay, let's get all the stakeholders here and fundamentally agree that indeed this has been decided. So we go for a new IDM. Sorry, we do not touch the old IDM. We set up the sandbox development in the sandbox fully configured, and then switched and copy and move and migrate and convert the configuration from sandbox to development. Sandbox and development will be single server installations. On test and production, of course, we have a kind of redundant setup, high availability setup with load balancers in front, etc., etc. I'm not saying that this is already fully defined. I know that when 2 years or 3 years ago we did a move of the business object, then let's call it, there was a kind of sub-decision where we implemented a new load balancer for the new BO, and then we decommissioned the old load balancer. But that's details which we further need to validate. But that will only be applicable for test and production. So that's something which comes in 2-3 months from now. Okay. So the pending decisions here, because we focused mainly on IDM 7.2 to IDM 8.0. Fundamentally, I think we are already there that we make a statement, okay, we will go for a new portal. Don't bother too much about the technical details here, but fundamentally we are stating we will copy the old portal to the new portal. We will do there then an upgrade, etc. This gives the best guarantee that whatever is applicable in the current old portal will also be, let's call it, in the new portal. But there are still some things which need to be verified, which will happen the coming weeks. And there were some stories about GATS and NIT, which is going to vanish or change or integrate, or I'm not in the details there. That's something for DVR security team. And I think this Fredriksen guy who is involved there. And one big item here, Asa, is, let's call it what we call the audit requirements. I had yesterday or the day before yesterday already kind of trigger an interaction with Darsan here. So one of the big things here, at a certain moment, the current IDM is being used in the context of audits for SKF, where the auditors are coming in and they are saying, okay, we have here a certain user, show me everything which happens on this user. Locking, unlocking, assigned to SAP systems, change of roles, remove of that user end-to-end, whatever. And this whole report comes from the IDM. Now, if we are looking at the new IDM, then it must be clear, let's call it, that we need, let's call it, a good story, a validation, a confirmation that the new IDM is covering the audit requirements. There are different ways and different ideas about this one, but we need to be explicit here, what should be done, what can be done, and how we should do it. Okay, so this audit thing is a little bit like, yeah, it's a critical item in this IDM upgrade, IDM move, new IDM context. And one item I didn't mention here, because I don't know how to evaluate that one. There was a statement also that new user provisioning would run over snow, SKF snow. But to be honest, I don't know how that one needs to be evaluated.
Yes, that is something that Kristoffer Eriksson at SKF is looking into together with ServiceNow team to move certain things from the portal to ServiceNow.
Yeah.
We are developing Snow, right? That we are working on that IM project because of we don't need two different IDM portals. This is the scenario behind that project.
Well, I don't really know what is the driver, but what Kristoffer Eriksson has explained is that they want to reduce complexity for end users. A number of portals they need to go into to order things from different systems and like access and these things. So I only know that it's some kind of simplification they are doing for end users.
So is it possible to link one portal with two different systems?
As we have understood, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they will communicate over the REST API available in IDM.
Okay, so that the portal will communicate with the test and production together at the same time?
No. Means in ServiceNow, user will raise the request. ServiceNow will be the UI for the end user, and the request will be forwarded to IDM.
Yeah, exactly.
Forwarded to IDM using the REST API.
But also, I think to Snow, to Active Directory, to potentially mainframe, whatever. Yeah, I mean, the goal is, let's call it the end user goes to Snow, flags on what kind of access he needs, tick, and then of course Snow needs to distribute, let's call it, to the different tools which are needed to get the user provisioning end-to-end working. It looks like now that the end user has to go to one system and then to another system and then to a third system to get all the accesses he needs.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that. But okay, we are not in the details there. But of course we need, there was a statement from SAP here, Abhishek, if I remember correct, stating something like, okay, if we have this Snow process in place, do we still need a portal? And I think the statement from SAP was yes.
Yeah, we still need the portal.
Yes, for admin reasons, let's call it so. For end user perspective, most likely the things can be organized, but for admin bulk loads, synchronizations, new systems, new synchronizations, whatever. Yeah, you guys are far more expert in that than I am. Let's call it, you still need this portal. So let's call it the portal you will need anyway. Maybe no longer for end users, but at least for administration of IDM.
Yeah.
So then on this page, you see the flow for Azure. Yeah. So we set up a new sandbox. We set up a new development. We fully configure sandbox. We let's call it copy, move, translate, transfer, transport, convert. Let's call it the data from the sandbox to the development environment, and then we do a full validation on the development environment. Once we feel comfortable about that one, then we decide, let's call it, to move ahead with the test and production environment. And I think I sent a mail to, was it Kishor? So I saw a pending mail because somebody was asking, okay, why would we put test and production on VPC? Well, that will depend on timing, yeah. So there is a proof of concepts ongoing related to move test and production to Azure, depending on the findings there and the comfortability feeling and the final conclusions. Let's call it. It's possible that test and production will move, taking into account that this is at first anyway a side-by-side installation. It's possible, let's call it, that this will not be on VPC, but on the what I call final Azure environment SKF. So that data center decision, let's call it, is something which I put in the mail, something November, December. We have to start building the test and production environment. And that will, of course, depend, let's call it, on the status of the proof of concept move to Azure project. Okay, so but for the sandbox and development, no doubt that one will go to SKF Azure.
Do we use, Abhishek, do we use sandbox for 7.2?
No, sandbox we are not using currently.
No.
So is it possible to upgrade the existing VM to
No. Okay. No, forget upgrade. Yeah, really forget upgrade. I mean, I can only emphasize, let's call it, we're talking about the old IDM, we're talking about the Windows 2008 environment on an MS SQL 2012, on an IDM 7.2. The upgrade files, the upgrade documentation is simple, not available on the SAP marketplace. We need first to make a request to SAP to make this one available, let's call it. And then on top of that, you cannot move, let's call it, from the current Windows Server 2008 to a supported Windows environment because IDM 7.2 is simply not running on Windows Server 2016. I mean, just take into account this IDM is 4 years out of support. Yeah, 4 years out of support.
Okay.
So really forget upgrade. This is, I emphasized this 2 years ago. I emphasized this in October this year. I emphasized this in February. It's really, let's call it, if somebody decides, okay, we need to go for an upgrade, let's call it, I will not take the responsibility. Sorry.
And earlier this year, when we had the big incident with over a week downtime, SAP were involved and they had a look at this and said, we won't be able to do an upgrade.
Yeah.
With such an old platform.
And there are even technical things which I will not even highlight here. I can always explain to you, Darsan, but I don't want to bother the meeting here. But even the 2008 to 2012 thing, which we did in the proof of concept 1 and 2 back in 2019, even that one was not straightforward.
Yes.
And Windows Server 2012 is also out of support. So we have to move to Windows Server 2016 at least. Let's call it, and that's not a thing you can do one-to-one. So you have, by definition, 2 explicit long downtimes for this.
Yes.
So forget it.
Yeah, thank you, Hans, for explaining this from past and with the current suggestions also. But I just want to ask our SKF security team as well as CAP team, IDM, do we agree with this approach, which we can see right now in front of our screen?
I let you talk from security, Kishore, so you know that.
Yeah, it seems the approach.
I hand that over to you.
Yeah, this is the good approach actually. So we can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, and some comments from Per and Abhishek. Are you guys okay with this approach?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then let's confirm that we need to build 2 different VMs. First, right now for the sandbox systems in Azure environment. One would be with latest Windows server and along with latest Microsoft SQL server. Maybe Hans, if you can put some light over here, is it some do we have some roadblock to go with the latest MS SQL?
You will get, I've been working, Darsan, yesterday on what I call, and I will share this one out by noon today, which is the sequential implementation plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are no dates yet mentioned, but like a logical sequence. Let's call it, you need first to order the server, blah, blah, blah. Then you need to install the MS SQL. Then you need to install the IDM. Then you need to do some pre-configuration steps, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So not yet a timeline on this one, but like a sequential list of activities.
Yes.
I'm a famous Excel user for everyone's information. This Excel in the second tab will give the picture about the target software. So this one will contain the operating system, the MS SQL, and the IDM 8.0 target versions, what is available on the marketplace, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So there you will have the confirmation there. And there will be a third one, which is called resources. That's the way I work. Yeah, then I have everything in one sheet, which will contain, let's call it Asa's name, Kishore's name, Darsan's name, Per, Abhishek, and all the people who are involved in this, and each of them with a short description of each of their roles within this IDM project. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
But let's agree, Hans, over here that whatever we do, if we are not bound with any such kind of restriction from SAP side, then we need to go with latest SQL Server as well as latest Windows environment.
Yeah.
So that
and
we get more support from the OEM.
Yeah. And just to be on the explicit side here, Darshan, but okay. Let's take it when you receive this Excel with the supported versions. But let's call it, it would be nice, but to be confirmed, let's call it that we can go for Windows 2019 instead of Windows 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice if we can go indeed to MS SQL. I need to verify what the latest version is there, but we need to verify that it's supported on IDM, of course.
Yes. Okay, so I will wait for that.
The PAM will be added also to the Excel so that everybody is on the same page.
Yes. So, and now coming to this, Abhishek and Per maybe. So, as we discussed now that we would be creating a blank install for sandbox systems, and then we'll develop the system, will install it, and then you guys would be doing the configuration. Once all the integrations are working as expected, then we move the changes, or we install development system with the database of sandbox, and we convert that to dev. Okay.
Yeah.
It's more than the database, Darshan. Yeah. So let's call it. It's like Abhishek and Per are much better placed than me. But fundamentally, let's call it. You have a set of XMLs. You copy them over. You modify them. You make them applicable. Yeah. Correct. Let's call it the database is part of it, but there is also some transport layer in the IDM 8.0, which can be implemented to move some configurations from the sandbox environment to the development environment and things like that. So that's indeed something which needs further detailing by CAP. And most likely, Per and Abhishek, the moment that we're doing this part of the implementation plan, we should also activate this SAP resource, which we had in Q1 this year, to do kind of post-validation if we are on the right track there. I can't remember by heart his name, but I have it in the documentation, and I will add this name also in the Excel. So there was some IDM. Yeah.
You talk about the SAP person.
Yes. So there was an SAP guy engaged by Hitesh, let's call it, to really make the assessment. What is the best scenario? What are the activities to be done in scenario 1? What are the activities to be done in scenario 2? How do we look at it in SKF context, etc., etc. Yeah, and this guy needs to be engaged also.
Yeah, I can say when it comes to that, we need to set up the project according to all formality, and I have received that name, and the guidelines from Hitesh before he left was that I should assign him for 10 days. Do you think that makes sense, or is it more required?
I think we actually discussed half a day per week during project, at least intense periods, since he had such deep insights in all SAP services.
Yeah, exactly.
I note that down. I mean, we need to set up the project and assign people and all that kind of stuff. So when we come to conclusion, then we will set that up with the SKF resources and what consultants that is required for this project. And me and Kishor will do this together and then set it up as a project, so to say. We need to have an IT PM also from our end to help us with all administration and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So we do things right.
Yep.
Yeah.
We will run it as a normal project, IT project.
Okay.
And just a question, Asa and Darsan.
Divya is also calling in now. Welcome, Divya.
Hi, Asa. Sorry, I joined in little.
No, but you notify me. I knew. It's good to see that you are back again. Divya is also supporting this to set up so we get in all the names that is right. We talked and then we align with your rest so we have not forgotten anything when we have put it together.
Yeah. Sorry guys, I had one question. Sorry Hans, I'm interrupting.
No, Darsan, you're the boss.
So Abhishek and Per. So since we have already agreed the build design, how we would be building our sandbox and development. So do we agree that we would be building our test systems from scratch as we do for sandbox, and then copy the same to production and do the manual changes, or we transport from development to test?
Abhishek, please speak here.
I mean, both the options should work, but what ideally we decided we should do the same set of activity in test as what we are going to do in sandbox.
Okay, so basically, then you agree with the approach which Hans has just now mentioned.
Yeah. So if you go to the page 4 here, you will see, let's call it the test production approach.
Kishor, can you please move to page 4?
Yeah, Abhishek, that configuration can be transported, right?
Let's agree this way. Let's call it, once we have done sandbox to development, fundamentally, we currently make the statement for two reasons. Let's call it. One reason is the test environment will be by definition a distributed environment. So from a design perspective, some things will look different between development and test. For the moment, I would make the statement that would not stop us, let's call it, to transfer. I use very high level quoted entry here, to move, let's call it, or transfer the configuration from development to test. But fundamentally, it will a little bit depend on the findings when we do the sandbox to development.
And that's why